On the road to Pasadena, let's talk about how Alabama could be Michigan's worst nightmare. No doubt you saw the reaction on Selection Sunday of the Michigan players, Lance.
Well, Michigan, just watching Alabama and what they did to a team that had won 29 consecutive games in Georgia. Look, your gift is as the number one overall seed getting the SEC champion. This is something we haven't seen before.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, if you were Michigan, I think you obviously wanted Florida State. I think they felt like they matched up better against Florida State. Maybe even Oregon. Like if Oregon were able to sneak into this, I would say the one team historically they've shown they would not want to play would be the SEC champion.
Yep. Let's talk about what Michigan brings into this game. First of all, the quarterback, J.J. McCarthy. Look at this amazing stat for a guy who got one vote for the Heisman Trophy. J.J. McCarthy hasn't thrown for over 150 yards since November 4th against Purdue, where he went for 335, 60, 141, 148, 147. There's a reason why, though, he's not throwing the ball a lot.
Look, this is a guy that didn't even attempt to pass in the second half against Penn State. They haven't had to throw the football. They run the football as well as anybody. And J.J. McCarthy, I mean, not to his credit, but, I mean, it's a legitimate excuse. He's had an ankle injury, and this gives him a little bit of time now with the break between Big Ten Championship and semifinal in the Rose Bowl, time to heal up a little bit because this is a mobile quarterback.
You know what's interesting in those games you just showed, outside of the Penn State game where they rushed 227 yards, 3 touchdowns, almost 5 yards a carry, listen to their rushing yards in those other games. 150 against Maryland and 3 touchdowns where he only threw it for 141 yards, under 300 yards in that game for them. Against Ohio State, 156 yards, 2 touchdowns. Against Iowa, 34 carries, 66 yards, 2 touchdowns. 1.94 yards per carry. So McCarthy wasn't throwing the football. He didn't necessarily have to because they won every one of those games I was talking about. They're a good rush offense, but they didn't necessarily run up and down the field on those 4 teams that they weren't throwing against.
Yeah, I just feel like Michigan has been holding back offensively. Like, I don't know, I don't think they're just going to, throw something out that we haven't seen all year, but it's like it's the most conservative game plan week in, week out, but it works because the defense is so good, and they haven't really played an explosive offense outside of Ohio State.
I think Jim Harbaugh is one of those guys that is very comfortable doing it a non-traditional way. Maybe it's a more traditional way, actually, and just running the football and burning clock, and does not care that you think his offense is not flashy. Does not care that it might not appeal to a certain element of recruits. He does it the Jim Harbaugh way, and it almost feels like if you criticize it, he's going to do it more that way.
It was very 2009, 11, and 12 Alabama that changed now the way they play football, which is surprising to some folks when Kirby Smart said Alabama whipped us up front, because that's what Alabama's going to have to do to win this game. They're going to have to beat Michigan in the trenches on the offensive and defensive lines. Let's look at this breakdown of the Wolverines' offense versus the Alabama defense. Well, let's go tight offense first versus the Wolverines defense. The Michigan defense comes in with a lot more respect right here than you would think the Michigan defense would get.
Yeah, and when I talk to people, they continue to say Michigan hasn't played any good offenses. Look, that might be correct. Ohio State, really good offense, but the fact of the matter is when you're giving up less than 10 points per game, I don't care who you're playing.
The number that will jump out the most to you, though, Lance, is Michigan second in passing defense, giving up 152 yards per game. You look at that and you're like, wow, that's really impressive. They have played exactly two top 50 passing offenses, Maryland and Ohio State, and 6 of the 12 teams they played this year were 100th or worse in passing offense. That's half their schedule in the regular season, 100th or worse in passing offense over a full season. So I don't know how much of that number 2 in the country pass defense is fact or fiction for them.
Yeah, and as Joel Klatt told us on the Next Round show, they have not seen a quarterback like Jalen Milroe yet. It's a different animal that's coming at him this time. Reminds me of some old Ohio State quarterbacks of yesteryear.
Yeah, and look, and I think that is going to be the biggest difference for this Michigan defense is having to contain a guy like Jalen Milroe. And you wonder, after Auburn not having a lot of success using a spy, you wonder what Michigan's plan is going to be.
Yeah. And go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, I find it interesting with Milroe. The more he's run later in the year, maybe the better Alabama has played a little bit. 20 carries, 155 yards, 4 touchdowns against LSU. Was massive in that game with a lot of called and designed runs. Fewer designed runs against Auburn, still, though, had 18 carries, 107 yards. And those rushes on plays that were broken down or plays where the pass wasn't there were massive in that game for Alabama. Didn't have a ton of yards against Georgia, but still ran it 14 times. And, I think that's key. 20, 18, 14 in those biggest games there.
Here's the Wolverines' offense against the Tide defense, and this number may surprise you a little bit, that Alabama's 33rd in the country against the run. If they can't stop Michigan running the ball, it could be a long day.
Yeah, look, and obviously everybody knows about Blake Corum. I mean, he's a touchdown machine. But on the other side, Donovan Edwards. I mean, they've got multiple guys that are 1,000-yard guys. And, yeah, Michigan runs it as well as anyone. What is interesting is Michigan's offensive numbers are actually better than Alabama's offensive numbers.
Yeah, you wouldn't guess by watching the two. But, I mean, I do think that's obviously, if you want to look at a key for Alabama against Michigan, if you limit Blake Corum, and I know McCarthy's a nice quarterback, but if you've put the game entirely in his hands and you've taken the pass away, Iowa was able to do that. But Iowa does not have Alabama's offense. It didn't matter with Iowa. If you can do to their offense what Iowa did, it becomes very, very difficult for Michigan to find a path to win.
Yeah, I agree. I think if they don't rush for 150-plus yards, I just don't see a path to victory with J.J. McCarthy throwing for 300 yards against his defense.
Pasadena is where nightmares can turn into dreams.